Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you're at. Welcome to our STD Maven Users Group meeting for May 19th. We're really excited to have you here. I know it's been a while since we've had a meeting. We're sort of back in the groove again. As a lot of you know, we've kind of switched off to having, instead of 4 meetings a year, 2 meetings a year with hopefully 2 informatic webinars. So we are going from there. Let me do a quick poll question while we're waiting for people to join us. And we'll get started in a second. So just curious to see how many people, if this is your first meeting or not. I know we have a lot of long-term users. I think Robin and I just looked at how long we've been doing Maven meetings. I think it's about 8 years, so at least 6 to 8 years. So I know we've been doing them a long time and we're always kind of looking at how we can improve them. So we'll leave this poll question up for about another 30 seconds while we're waiting for people to join, and then we'll get heavily into the meeting. Okay, about 10 more seconds and then I'm going to close the poll. So thank you for, it looks like about half of you are new, so that's interesting. We're hoping that the agenda was so intriguing that you had to be here on a Thursday afternoon or morning. So thank you. Okay, just show you the results. All right, so as I said, Robin and I have been, and prior to that, Marvin had been running users groups primarily for Maven and Prism, and then we've added NBS last 3 or 4 years. So our roles are we facilitate, Robin and I facilitate the meetings, we plan, we communicate with people, we help get speakers. And so really appreciate all the efforts from Robin and her CDC Division of Surveillance and Science, Data Science branch to really help put these meetings on for you, everybody. And again, I think, you know, the reason we're doing these meetings is we know there's a number of STD surveillance systems out there. They get very complicated. Oftentimes, you know, it's hard to get support. And so I think all of us who have done data systems, you know, have kind of learned that you can really learn a lot from your peers and colleagues who have sort of probably solved the same kind of problems. So, you know, I know this is a cheesy cartoon, but basically we don't want to recreate the wheel is kind of our message. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you're not speaking, please keep your phone on mute. If you want to say anything, if you have any questions, I would recommend asking them in the chat, and hopefully the presenters will get to them either during or after their presentation. We have basically 2 sections of this meeting. One where we're going to talk about syphilis reactor algorithms, record search algorithms. And so we'll do a couple presentations and take questions. And then we're going to have another presentation from our colleagues in Washington, and then we'll take some more questions. So we'll play it by hand. If on the off chance, either my internet goes down or one of the, you know, just as long as the system's up, just stay on. It might take us 2 or 3 minutes to get back in. If for some reason the whole system's crashed, I would say wait 2 minutes and then try to get back in. Hopefully we'll be able to get back on. So I actually don't have a copy of the slides that are going to go in chat, but usually we will send those out or post those to everybody on the NCSD website or send out an email. And we're also probably will make a copy of the slides and the recording in our Slack Maven channel while it's still up and running. All right, so I know we had a lot of new people, so a little bit about why we do user groups. You know, our audience is people that are grantees that are funded out of the PEACH grant from CDC STD program. And we really want to share best practices, you know, problems that you've kind of worked out, solved. You know, maybe we can link you up with technical assistance. We at NCSD and Robin specifically don't provide direct technical assistance in all these systems, but you know, Robin does work in Maven, so she might be able to help. But if not, we hope to be able to link you up to somebody. And hopefully, you know, there are there are opportunities where we can talk about cost sharing, like if a module needs to be developed or something, maybe if 3 or 4 programs can pool their resources instead of everybody paying for individually might be a way to go. So that's kind of why we started user groups and why we hope to do that. I think an important thing is that, this is just, it's not just Robin and I talking to everybody. This is really everybody being involved. And so, when people post questions, or if you have questions from for the presenters, or if you have information that you can share, it's really great to kind of get out of your comfort zone and sort of help everybody out. So our agenda for today is, I'll do finishing up a couple of quick announcements. And then our first block is really talking about the syphilis record search algorithm. Sagad's going to talk about the syphilis record search and review process. Robin's going to talk about the New York City approach to this. And then we have colleagues from Conduent who's going to talk about using Maven to implement a syphilis reactor search algorithm. Followed up by, hopefully we'll just have a little bit of time for questions, and then we'll have a project area presentation from Washington State on the Maven data transformation engine. So we're really excited to hear about that. And then we have a couple of wrap-up questions, and hopefully everybody can give us a quick evaluation of this meeting. So a couple of quick announcements from me. Obviously, you're here for today's Maven session. We're having another one on NBS next week. NCSD is doing Taking a Comprehensive Sexual History webinar on the 24th. We're partnering with CDC on the National Internet Partner Services webinar on CICT chat box on the 25th. We're doing another webinar on reducing stigma and improving our work with people who use drugs seminar on the 7th. We are planning on hopefully having an informatics webinar in July or August, topic to be determined. We're working on that. Just as a reminder, CDC is having their virtual STD Prevention conference in September, and we're excited that NCSD is going to be doing a in-person conference in New Orleans in May. So just a couple of upcoming events. And just finally, like all of you, we try to evaluate what we're doing. And so usually we do a survey every year. I won't go through all the details, but just a couple of highlights. We sent out a survey to everybody who sort of signed up to be a participant in our user groups. We had 44 people complete the survey, and we thank everybody who completed the survey. I think we had about 27% of the survey participants were Maven users. About 40% of people indicated they participated in a user group meeting in the last year. I know this is kind of a biased sample, but of those, at least who fill out the survey, 96% of you told us that you felt that the users groups were helpful and should continue. So again, we hope to do that. And about 71% indicated they had participated in our informatics webinars, which we started about a year ago. So, glad that we can be of use. We're always thinking about how we can improve our meetings and make sure that they're meeting your needs. So any feedback, positive or things that we can do to improve, please let us know. So Robin, I'm going to turn it over to you to start making introductions.
Thank you, Charlie. Actually, I have one CDC item that I wanted to share before we get started. And it's really a non-informational information announcement in that CCELS has not yet announced a reconciliation date for 2020 data. However, the Division of STD Prevention would like to release some preliminary 2021 data this September, corresponding with the conference. And so as such, they're requesting that jurisdictions really do their best to get the majority of their 2021 data complete and finished by the beginning of July. So while that's not the official closeout date, that would be really helpful for the for the division to, put out that preliminary data and not have that be delayed. So thank you for your assistance with that. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Sagat Karki, who is a health scientist and one of my colleagues at CDC at the Surveillance and Data Science Branch. Sagat?
Thank you, Robin. Like Robin mentioned, my name is Sagat Karki, and I'm a health scientist at CDC's Division of STD Prevention. And today I want to introduce the syphilis record search and review algorithm and set the context for making this a smarter process. Next slide, please. So we will go over what was done in the past and why, what approaches are utilized today, and what could potentially be improved moving forward. Next slide, please. So in 1962, labs began to be required to report reactive serologies to public health. But by mid-70s, 1.4 million cases were reported each year, but public health agencies did not investigate all those records. So due to the high volume of these serologies, they were prioritized for further investigation using an administrative method. And those that did not meet this criteria were administratively closed. Next slide, please. One slide back, Robin. Yeah, so if you can see in the yellow line over there, I really want to emphasize that this method of administratively closing like serologies has not changed in more than 50 years. And a lot has changed in the last 50 years. Next slide, please. So this method of administratively closing records evolved into what we now know as the syphilis reactor grid. This process is based on local epidemiology and capacity, and typically evaluates the age, titer, and in some jurisdictions, gender that are reported on the serology. And they also vary by jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges of with this method? We know that the reactor grid misses cases. One study reported that the performance of the reactor grid depends on the prevalence of syphilis, and missed up to 66% of cases where the prevalence was more than 2%. We also know that the record search and review is a resource-intensive process, and another study also detailed how much some jurisdictions spend on that process. Next slide, please. So we created a computational algorithm that replaces the existing prioritization method and the need for manual record search and review. Next slide, please. So this algorithm compares the serology under evaluation with previous records and administratively closes those serologies that are likely to not be cases of syphilis. We had a webinar last November describing this algorithm in more detail, but if you have questions, please reach out to me. I can send some information or sit down and talk with you. And I also have some links in the next slide. So we partnered with the state of Florida and New York City to develop this algorithm, which is now published in Sexually Transmitted Diseases, and the Python codes are also available on GitHub. What we found was that using this algorithm, we correctly identified 99.4% of cases that were identified by the health department and saved an additional 590 workdays by preventing unnecessary investigations. So these were the high level, just if there were two things that to take away from this, that these are the two numbers I wanted to show. So we have a lot of wonderful team members in this project, and I want to thank all of them. Next slide, please. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. I would love to sit down and talk if you want to go over the algorithm, but I'm more excited about the next presentation with Robin and Convent about how we can implement this in Maven. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sagat. So I'm not actually going to give a presentation, but just share some of the thoughts that New York City has after working on this project with Sagat. And we in New York have a fairly complicated reactor grid, which is built into our Maven, and it uses a fair amount of custom code and Java codes, and Jeff can talk more about it when he's there, but very complex and not really flexible. Luckily, Conduent recently upgraded their rules engine. And so many of the lab rules that we used to use in custom code can now be done using the rules engine. And again, Jeff might mention this, he might not, but New York City recently had Conduent rewrite all of our syphilis reactor grid rules using the rules engine. So now that we are proving that that can work, we are moving forward and scrapping the reactor grid altogether and going to work with Conduent to build exactly the record search algorithm using the rules engine. So without further ado, I am going to turn this over to my colleagues. Oh, first we'll take the poll, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues in Conduent. So the question is about managing syphilis titer data in your ELR reports. So some of the responses are, you can use your titer information from labs without any change or cleaning the data. The quality of my information is mixed. Some are good, some require cleaning, or I have to spend a significant amount of my time cleaning my titer data. So for
we'll give everybody, but go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, for context, New York City is able to clean all of their titer data before it comes into Maven.
So maybe 10 more seconds if people could fill out the poll, and then we'll move on. So again, the question is, how do you manage syphilis titer data in Maven received via ELR? Okay, so we'll end the poll.
So it looks like a good mix. Some do a lot of cleaning, some do a little bit of cleaning, and majority do, it's a mixed bag. So with that, I am going to turn this over to my colleagues. So the folks from Conduent who will be talking to us are Dr. Diana Lydiard, who has worked with Maven for 7 years. But before that, she worked in a state public health department for 16 years. Additionally, Jeffrey Chirolis is a Maven developer for nearly 10 years. And I remember actually when Jeff first started and he got his training in New York City. He's a highly respected developer by New York City. Of note, birding is his new hobby, which he picked up during the pandemic. So without further ado, I will turn it over to those folks to really start sharing some ways that Maven users can implement these kinds of record search algorithms.
All
so
right.
Julie, I think you need to go back a couple slides.
Yeah, there we go. Hello, everybody. This is Diana, and it's great to be here today and a part of this meeting. Thanks for answering the poll. It's pretty much what we expected. There is a big mix of that in the way the labs send in their titers. And I'm actually not going to say too much more other than to hand it over to Jeffrey, who really is the skilled developer, as Robin has said, who has created some rules and wants to talk about how the rules can help manage titers. So Jeffrey.
Cool. Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey. I've been with Conduent for a little while and doing Maven development work. So this is, if we can go to the next slide, please. This is a kind of high level, very simplified example of how we might implement a Titer comparison. This is not a full implementation of the algorithm that was discussed prior, likely. And this is also probably going to be dependent on your various Maven systems and how things work there. Also dependent on Maven 6 or some newer versions of Maven that support the investigation results in the rules. And as another caveat, also requires some level of consistency among Titer data as we did the poll. So with all those caveats, I'll walk through a little bit about what this rule looks like, how it works, and what we're trying to do. So we have our ELRs that come in. And so by the time they are ingested into Maven, however that happens, whatever method is used there, they'll be created as a case, as a record. And this is for, we will want to make sure that they match to an existing party. This is kind of dependent on having the syphilis case come in to an existing party and then be able to compare the titers with that previous party's lab information. So once it's there, once it's created as a case or within that other party, then this rules engine will begin to evaluate. So starting at the top, we have a rules package that I've created just for this demo. We have 3 declarations that's increased, unchanged, and decreased. And from my understanding, those are kind of like the 3 results that we'd want to make some decision based on, whether things increased, whether it was unchanged, or whether they decreased. And we can add in more granularity there, whether it's increased 2-fold or 4-fold, or add in some nuance there, depending on what your need is. But this is just kind of a, like I said, a high level sample of how this might work. And then so we have 2 declarations after that. That's the previous Titer value that was already in that record, and then the current Titer value, or the new one that just came in that's being processed. So first we have a rule. Oh, excellent. Thank you. This is great. Our first rule is we're making some assignments. So we have a rule called Titer demo assignments. And this is where we are going to extract the Titer values from the current lab and from the previous lab. So we have an if step that makes sure the disease is syphilis. Then we hit this true block. So if it's true that the disease is syphilis, then we'll go into an investigation step where we're going to walk through all of our investigations, and then an investigation result step, which we will walk through all of our tests. We're going to go, this is more in the behind the scenes configuration of this step. We're going to go newest to oldest. And so the first one we hit will be the newest value. So we have an if condition that says if this is the first one. So we're checking Titer value current equals -1, which is our empty or dummy placeholder value to say that it's empty. So if it's -1, then we will assign that current value, the value that we're looking at in the iteration, which is that first one that we've just hit. So then at this point, our true block has evaluated. We will jump back to the next iteration on the investigation result step and say, hit this demo if first Titer again. So Titer value current is going to be equal to the Titer value and not -1. So then we'll fall to the else block because that first one has already been assigned. So now we're at the second one. So we'll say if Titer previous value is -1, which it is because we haven't set the previous value yet. So we will hit our true block. We will do a lookup. I'll get to the lookup in just a second. We will assign the Titer value to Titer value previous. and its result value. Then we're going to jump to the top again for the next iteration. We will find that the first titer is assigned, the second titer is assigned, and so we hit this last else block, which is the break step. And so it will stop at this point and end the loop. So it'll only process those first two iterations, or the first two iterations of the result step test that we hit. And before we continue, what value is it assigning? This table on the right, we're doing an assignment lookup based on this table. And this is where there might be some leeway, a little bit of, we can compensate for different values that we're receiving in terms of clean data. There's two formats that, at least in New York, we've implemented to use for titers. It's the 1:1, 1:2, or just 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. So it will currently process with either of these formats. It's going to take the colon format or the non-colon format and then map it to one without a colon. And so this is one place where if you're receiving data in different formats, you might be able to configure it to give you the result you want. It will still need to fall in this table somewhere. So you'll want the data clean enough that any possibility that you get in is listed on this table and does have a map to it. But we can compensate for some different formats here by using this table. And then at this point, so we have our declarations titer value previous and our titer value current assigned based on going through that iteration of our lab results. And then so we're going to go on to our comparison step. So we have, again, we're checking syphilis, and then we will do just a simple comparison. If the previous titer value current is greater than titer value previous, then we'll create an execution output called increased titer results, which is just this one that we see at the top here. Is this increased titer results is yes. And then if it's less than that, then we will have a true block output that says decreased titer results. And then if neither of those are true, then it falls to that last else block, which is that the results were unchanged. So after this runs, we will have one of three flags, which is increased, unchanged, or decreased. And then so we can use those flags in a workflow, we can use them in a report, we can use those in various flags in the system. If I know in New York, we've implemented the administrative close process, which is a separate process that is implemented in custom code, and we can fire that whole process based on this any one of these results. So we can do, that's where we'd implement whatever kind of functionality that you need or actions that you would like to take based on the results processing here. And so they may be something that you can that you implement on your end through workflows or other rules, or they may be more complicated things that we can do through the code. So in a nutshell, that's a high level run through of how we might implement a comparison between a lab result coming in with a titer value compared to the old titer record.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and Diana. So this made perfect sense to me, but I've described this to Jeff plenty of times. So we wanted to, and I think we have enough time to just open it up for, questions, like while you have Jeff sort of right here and available to you. Did this make sense to you? Do you have questions, etc.?
Yeah, please ask if anyone has any questions.
Hi, Jeff. This is Mary McNeil from Ohio. I had a quick question. In your guys' algorithm, are you able to tell the difference between a patient who may have been named as a contact with a non-reactive RPR versus a patient who may have had discordant results where they have like an IgG that was positive, an RPR that was non-reactive, and then the TPPA that was reactive? The only reason why I ask is because usually in Ohio, if you have seroconversion where they've only had a non-reactive RPR, if they go to a 1-to-1, that would be considered a new case. But if they're going from discordant results where they've had a non-reactive RPR, they wouldn't, a 1-to, and the two TPPAs were reactive, then we wouldn't initiate a new field record unless there was a 4-fold increase, which would need to be a 1-to-2 or higher.
So that
Jeff, do you want me to field that first?
sure. I was just gonna say it's quite it's probably a great question. Very specific on the STD details, which I may not be aware of. So
Yeah. So Mary, this algorithm is looking specifically at non-treponemal titers. It does not address the other types of tests. Now, that said, if someone had a non-reactive and then they had a 1-to-1, a non-reactive as a partner and then a 1-to-1 later on, that certainly could be marked by this algorithm as titer has increased. And then as Jeff sort of laid it out, the jurisdiction can decide sort of the different sort of outcomes, like what they would want to do with titer has increased 2-fold, titer has increased 4-fold, titer is exactly the same, etc. So I hope that covers your question. If not, try me again.
Yep, it does. Thank you.
and again, this is kind of high level. If there are other conditions or other factors, data fields that are part of that ELR that are coming into Maven that you'd like to add as checks or conditions, these can definitely be added in whatever part of this process. This is just kind of one example of a simple outcome comparing one titer to another. If there are other complications, they're welcome to add those in.
Can I add a question? This is Garrett from DC. Kind of piggybacking off of that, I know we're just looking at non-treponemal tests, and you kind of mentioned that if there was a non-reactive, I know like a lot of us don't get the non-reactive test, but if somebody did, like through a search with the provider, saw that there was a non-reactive test and tries to enter that into Maven after the fact, like manually, can it back calculate, or will it back calculate? And then how would it correct, that there was a event that should have been created or something like that?
Yeah, so Jeff, I definitely need to have you comment on that. And that's basically if can you make this comparison happen on hand entered data or just incoming ELR?
Yeah, so this is happening at the rules level. So it will apply to however the data comes in. It can be manually entered. It's going to compare the last 2 labs, regardless of how they've come in the system. They can be rosters, they can be ELRs, they can be manually entered, because it's not part of the DTE. It's not part of the processing of the ELRs. It's just within the rules engine, which goes to the question package and the lab investigation data. So, yeah.
Jeff, I hope, Charlie, do we have time for one more question?
Sure, and there's also a question in the chat as well.
That was the question I was
Okay.
going to.
Sure.
So the question is from Catherine Sung. Can you explain how the syphilis labs are organized in your system? Are they all attached to and located in the same event? Is it possible for Maven to look across different events to compare titers? So I will start and say that within the New York City Maven, we definitely have multiple syphilis events for a person. And so, one of our requirements would be that this has to look at all the titers that we have on a person, not just within a single event. Jeff, if you wanted to say anything else about that.
Yeah, so this simplified method would require the since it's running in the rules engine, the rules run per case. So we would need the last two titers that we're checking within the same case. So if there are multiple cases for the same party, we can look at some other options for that. It won't be quite this simple for sure. So we'll have to look into that and see how we might manage it across cases. But we're looking into other ways of trying to consolidate syphilis cases within, like, to the right party and then to the same case, so that we can have all the information into one case. That would be the ideal. So yeah.
Great. So, thanks for those 3 presentations. I would say if you have any questions, please reach out to any of our presenters, or, go to Robin, and Robin can help direct the question to somebody. So, thank you. And I think that's really an important subject. And now we're all dealing with increased levels of syphilis. And so having anything that can sort of save person power is really helpful to our programs. So Robin, you want to introduce our next speakers?
I'd be happy to. So the next part of our user group today is regarding the data transformation engine within Maven, so the DTE, and specifically using the DTE to produce the CDC soon to be required MMGs. And with us today are some colleagues from Washington State. They are not STD colleagues, but infectious disease colleagues nonetheless. Emily, who has an MPH, is an epidemiologist with the Washington State Department of Health, and she works on the Washington Disease Reporting System, which is Maven, with the primary role of implementing MMGs. And previously, she worked as an epidemiologist at the Minnesota Department of Health and a microbiologist at the Tennessee Department of Health. And she will also be presenting with her colleague, Tiffany Firestone, who is a developer of the Washington Disease Reporting System at the Washington State Department of Health. And the primary role is implementing those MMGs. She previously worked on StarLimbs at the Washington State Public Health and has had Public Health Labs and has had various technical positions in organ and tissue donation field. So again, we thank these folks for joining us, and I will turn it over.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Firestone, and Emily and I have been MMG developers for almost a year and a half. We were hired right around the same time. So thanks for this time. We're going to give a high-level overview of the data transformation engine. What is it exactly, and how do we produce HL7 extracts with these tools? So the data transformation engine, or the DTE for short, is a set of 3 tools provided by Conduent. And it allows us to map and build HL7 extracts to meet CDC messaging requirements. And this is just a little snapshot of the CDC website where they publish their implementation spreadsheets for all their final MMGs. And then we'll kind of just give, again, a high-level overview of how we use these tools to produce this final HL7 message. So the first component is the transformation editor, and this is located within Model Manager. It behaves similarly to the rule editor or rules engine, where you can create declarations and rule packages, and the rule packages contain the same functions like iteration steps and investigation steps, assignments, etc. The biggest difference is these rules within the transformation editor are only run when a transformation process is triggered, and the values from execution outputs do not persist in the database. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second component is the data transformation template. And so this is how we control how the case data will be transformed and how it will be presented in the message. It is written in the FreeMarker template language, and we included a link here to their online manual, and Emily and I leaned heavily on this when we needed to make some additional development to our templates. So it uses things like text markup, Maven specific tokens that pulls case data, party data, model fields, and rule outputs. And this snapshot just shows a couple of those examples, like the party data and some of the model fields. And next, thank you. It also uses FreeMarker tags like if-else statements and lists. Just another example. And then finally, it uses built-in functions where you can tap into reference code groups to return values or descriptions. And you can also calculate the MMWR week and year. And the final and third component is the export processing module. And this is required in order to run a data transformation export. And this is added and configured back in the admin advanced processing module section. And Emily will talk a little bit more about how that's configured. And I'm going to pass this off to Emily. She's going to step you through a specific example and how it works through all these components.
Yeah, so the first part I'm going to give an example on is the transformation editor. Next slide, please. So here's an example from our TB implementation guide. We don't have STDs in our Maven system, so we chose TB examples for this purpose. So this is a repeating block, the laboratory repeating block. And it's a good example of when we need to use a transformation editor to be able to go through multiple iterations. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot from our transformation editor with a rule that Tiffany and I created for the repeating block, where we create an iteration step and assign different values depending on some simple conditions. Next slide. And then the next part is the extract syntax, which involves data transformations and reference code groups. So going off of the previous example of the lab repeating group, this is what it looks like in our data transformation template, where we have those outputs that we created in our transformation editor, and we're able to list them. And after that, you can see our template that we created so that we have the format that we want in our final message. And separately from that, there's also the macro section of our data transformation template. This was something that had been built by Conduent several years ago. And it formats the OBX segments based on data element attributes that are coded in reference code groups. And in our TB MMG, we have about 70 of the data elements that go through the macro, and then the rest of the data elements we have coded differently. For example, like the lab repeating group that we had shown before. So this is just a little screenshot that shows some of the different pieces of the macro code that we use and the different reference codes that it's calling on to do that. Next slide. And this is the entire list of reference codes that are needed for the macro code that we use. So it includes things like whether or not OBX5 can repeat, the code system that's used, if applicable, the OBX6 value that needs to go in the OBX segment, the HL7 value, if it's a literal value that we use in every single message. HL7 variable is the Maven QID or output that we send in the OBX5. The reference code group that links it to the FinVAD's value set to convert it from our Maven value to the CDC accepted values. The short name is just the description, like you would see in the implementation spreadsheet. And then also the type, which is in OBX2, which is in the, and then the next part of this macro demonstration is just to see how the reference code groups link up to the FinVAD's value sets. So this example shows smoking status, and the screenshot at the bottom is what we end up getting in our message based on the macro code that you see at the top of the page. Next slide. So we have 3 different reference codes that put those pieces together for us. So the code is the Maven answer value, and then the description is the text that you end up seeing in the message itself. So you can see for someone that answered former smoker in the user side, you would get these highlighted values showing up in your message based on these FinVAD's reference code groups that we created. And then the final part is the export, which we use our processing module for. And this is our TB processing module. You can have it scheduled multiple ways. It could be a manual or a periodic schedule. You link the data transformation to this processing module. And you have a SQL query, which will determine which cases get pulled into your transformation. And then the bulk action is something that Conduent builds and it executes a specific expression. So it sets flags and also populates some different fields for us as well. And then this is just an example of some extracts using that TB lab repeating block example from the beginning, where you can see what ends up in the message from our transformation editor through our DTE data transformation template and what ends up into the message. I believe that's everything.
Thank you. Any questions for any of our speakers?
I have a question. How long did it take for your jurisdiction to go maybe from 0 to your first outputted message, right? Like if someone's starting from scratch, how long might it take a jurisdiction to build a message?
So I think we kind of came in mid-game, but just to guesstimate, assuming if someone was provided the macro that Emily described, and depending on the MMG, because the TBV3 MMG is a huge MMG with just so many data elements. But with that caveat, gosh, I don't know, Emily, what would you say? Because we also had to learn free marker and all that development along with it. So I would say it took us about a year to get to this point where we're ready to go live.
Yeah, I would say that it heavily depends on how much you're going to do on your own versus how much you're going to have Conduent do. We do most of it on our own based on some of the things that our predecessors had received from Conduent to kind of make it fit our system for us. But I know there's a lot of different ways you could approach it.
Thanks for that answer.
Other questions? So as you can see, we launched a quick poll question to see if your program's interested in Conduent providing onboarding support for MMGs, which includes working with CDC to submit the required data, completing templates, test scenarios. So I'll give everybody about 15 more seconds to answer that. Feel free to reach out to Robin or Conduent. We'll also maybe put together a list of people that said they want more information, and maybe somebody will contact you on that. And here's the results of our survey, of our poll question. So it looks like almost 40% said yes, and another third wants more information, and then a third either don't know or they're not in that kind of a role that they could really answer this question. Okay, so let me just make sure I didn't. Anything to add, Robin, before we move on? Or again, last chance if anybody has any questions for any of our speakers, especially around the data transformation engine. Can you maybe answer how long it took you to develop the engine?
The data transformation template, the one
Yeah.
in free marker code. So, gosh, well, we had to learn the whole Maven system to begin with and free marker. So it took us probably 6 months to make all the additions in addition to the macro code that Conduent provided.
Okay.
So
And maybe
significant investment was needed to, I think significant investment would be needed to do MMGs regardless of whatever method, but using the built-in Maven method also took some time.
And does anybody from Conduent want to talk about next, if somebody's interested, what they should do or what's involved or?
Yeah, hi, this is Diana. I would love for y'all to reach out to me. You can reach me at conduent.diana.lydiard@conduent.com. And I can start to connect some dots for you and we can see what we can do to help you out or what more information you would like.
Great. Maybe if you could just put your email address in the chat box,
Sure.
people can grab that, and we will make the slides available, which I think has your email in there. So we've got a little bit more than 5 minutes. Again, if people have questions while I'm talking, put them in the chat and we'll try to address them. I think we might have a question. Okay, there's Diana put her information in the chat. So just a couple of quick reminders to everybody. Let me go back. We really appreciate everybody participating in the user groups. Again, we need everybody's active participation. Feel free to either use Slack or reach out to Robin or myself. One of the things that we're working on is right now we have separate Slack channels for Prism, Maven, and NBS. To be honest, they're really not used that much. We know that there's a lot of challenges with IT, roadblocks about, allowing the external usage and stuff. So one of the things we're working on creating is, instead of having 3 different users groups, migrating to a surveillance community, which is going to be posted up on the MyNCSD website. And if you need any information about how to join that, we post a lot of really great information around a number of subjects related to STD prevention. We have a DIS channel, we have other channels. So we're hoping that this is going to broaden right now, again, really kind of move away from these system-specific users groups to a more common STD surveillance issues where we can involve people that have like some homegrown systems and other stuff. And I think it also dovetails better with our sort of informatics approach. So stay tuned to that. Hopefully this summer we'll be launching that. I'm going to launch a final poll just to give us an idea of, one of the things we want to always do is make sure that these meetings are are useful for you and worth the time that you've spent. We know how busy everybody is and really nobody has any time to spare, but so whatever we do, we always want to make sure that the time that you spent here was you learned something and you maybe at least found out who I can maybe connect with to get some questions or answers to some of my questions later. So we don't expect to answer every question on these sessions, but at least to give you an idea of like who might be able to provide some answers. So let me launch my poll question if I can figure that out. And so our question is, how useful was today's users group meeting? Very useful, somewhat useful, not useful. And I would say if it's not useful, please send Robin or I an email saying, hey, here's some things you can do to really make the meetings a little bit more useful to us in this situation. Or if you really think the meetings are useful, we'd love to hear that, as well as we're also interested in looking at topics for future meetings. So I think this was a really information-packed meeting. We had some great topics, and this is kind of what we want to hopefully do moving forward with the with the Maven users groups. I know occasionally the topics are a little bit less interesting. So, please work with us. And these are meetings, we do these meetings for you and we want to make them useful to you. So another 10 more seconds and we'll close the poll out. And again, I really appreciate everybody giving us feedback. Again, it helps us to have better meetings. So it looks like about half of you said it was very useful. Another half said it was somewhat useful. So glad to hear that it was somewhat useful or useful. Again, we're always looking for ways to make them even more helpful. And again, I think our STD surveillance community might be another way to kind of help everybody else. So see if there's anything else. So again, we hope you found today's meetings useful. If you have any comments or suggestions, get a hold of us. Here's our email addresses. We'll post a copy or send out a copy of the recording to everybody, as well as with the slides. We know like Sagat has links to, and other people had links to resources. So those slides will have hyperlinks in those. Any final thoughts or questions, Robin or anybody else?
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, thank all the speakers. We worked really hard to bring a lot of people together today. And I was especially excited to, make new connections with folks in Washington. Even though they're not STI colleagues, they are Maven colleagues. And so thanks to both of them for joining us.
And I think in the chat, somebody asked, can we do a demo of Maven for STD use? So we'll think about how we can maybe talk about doing that. And maybe if there's going to be a demo, we can allow, like for the person that asked for it, and then open it up for other people that might be interested. So we'll think about that. Again, stay tuned. We're excited about planning our informatics webinar, which is going to come out probably, again, I think July or August. I think that's about it. Any other final questions or remarks? Really appreciate all our speakers taking time. It's a lot of work to make presentations, get ready. And we really appreciate our speakers taking time out of their busy schedules to get ready. So we have a question. Can you explain how the syphilis labs are organized in your system? Are they all attached to and located on the same event? Is it possible for Maven to look across different events to compare titers? So
Yeah,
Robin
actually,
or
Charlie,
somebody?
we did address that question during
Okay.
the first session. So I think for the most part, we've covered things in the chat.
Great. All right. Well, I have 4 o'clock, so we don't want to keep you any longer than we have to. So thanks everybody for taking time out and participating, and we'll see you in a couple months.